I want to tell you about the most financially free I've ever felt in my adult life. It wasn't when I was earning the most, and it wasn't when I had most saved. It was when I actually needed the less. And the distance between those two things, between having more and needing less, took me actually an embarrassing amount, a long time to understand. Growing up, it's like everybody else. You think the more money you have, the more options you have, the more opportunity for success, the more labeling for success you have. And then I guess at some point in time, you eventually arrive at this miraculous place, somewhere that's supposed to be like freedom. And if you really think about it, that promise is always on the other side. More and more. Get the bigger salary, get the promotion, pay off the house. I mean, that's the real big one. It's always like, oh, I can finally relax when this is done. The house is the big one. And then you go to a certain number in the account. You got to have this. And so you organize your life around the pursuit of more. And I think that's a very easy routine to fall into. It seems so harmless. It makes total sense in the beginning when you start all of this. But often we do this without stopping to ask whether the life we're building to support the more is actually one you've chosen. In the trap, every time you get more, the baseline shifts, the goalpost moves, the lifestyle expands to meet, and really the obligations multiply extremely fast. You got the overhead, financial, mental, emotional, quickly grows. And again, it's all on a path that seems so innocently normal. It just makes nothing but sense. You're kind of doing everything and you say, okay, I've got to get to this path. I'm really working hard towards getting this number. I'm doing this promotion or getting this raise or paying this off or paying for this entertainment so I can finally relax. But it always shifts. It always moves on you. And, you end up working harder than ever just to maintain a life that was supposed to be making things easier to begin with. And they lived a very long time that way. And I think actually a lot of people do. It's just a common pace. And what does overhead actually cost us? I mean, we all know, it's stressful to get ahead. Bills are getting harder. The cost of living is going up and up. But yet the goals are actually even going up as well, or they're harder to maintain. And what's that financial cost? The actual mental and emotional cost. And then, of course, the whole financial thing. There's things that require maintenance. The mortgage, the vehicles, the subscriptions, the storage, the insurance, the appearances. And each one of these things, they're very reasonable on their own. As together, it's a structure that demands a certain income just to keep standing, just to stay afloat, just to feel like you're gaining, good luck trying to even feel like you're gaining ground. And I think this is why it's so easy to get caught in that illusion, that thinking, okay, yes, when I finally reach this particular level, I'll be able to say to myself, oh, this was actually all worth it. And then there's the less visible costs, the obligations that come with life. The commitments you can't easily exit, the identity you tie to yourself, this to be the standard that you've built, the fear of losing what you've assembled. And this becomes a very valid fear. Because I said this before too, actually the more you inquire, the more it feels like you are out of control in some aspects of it, because you have to, or at least there's a heavier weight, because now you have to protect it. You've got to figure, okay, what are the odds that this is going to break down? Do I have to save up extra money for this? Is this going to be a nuisance? Is this going to be, there's a whole bunch of things that you've got to do to maintain what you're gaining. And then on top of that, you want to continue your goal. Freedom in a high overhead life is always conditional. You can kind of do what you want as long as the structure stays intact. And that's a key thing to think about as well. Because let's face it, how often do things actually really stay intact? How do things actually stay on plan? That old saying, how often does a monkey wrench gets thrown into the system? And then you feel you got to, 2 steps back kind of thing. And a lot of these conditions become kind of like invisible. You don't really know what's happening, how the underlying thing's been there, and if it's been there long enough, you stop thinking of yourself as constraint, you just think of yourself as responsible. And then with that responsibility comes a heavier burden again. And there again, you want to protect it and you want to maintain it, and you got to see where is this going to lead? How much more do I need? How much more of a burden is this? And these, when I say it, I'm not over dramatizing, the burdens and all this kind of stuff, but they are little nagging noises in the background that do add up. And there's a big difference between responsibility and captivity. And I would actually argue that a lot of times they start looking a lot alike and they blending into each other without even really noticing it. It all becomes part of it. And if any of you guys kind of understand where I'm coming from and get where I'm at, and are experience those particular feelings, I'd like to hear from your comments and see what you do, or have you noticed these things, and what is your outlet. And maybe you have some advice to share. By all means, please put it down. I'd like to hear it. I think sooner or later we all have this moment that the logic somehow gets flipped on us. For me personally, I had this plan, and it was always built around retirement. And I've said in some of my other videos, got into a little bit more, but what I'm saying is, you're out, which is very common practice. And the other scary thing is now they're actually encouraging people to work longer and longer. But I was trying to step back, and I was trying to look at it like, okay, well, if I stay here, and how much overhead do I need? What kind of budget? What kind of bank account? What do I need for assets? And realizing with the cost of living going up higher and higher here, it's significant. And then, yes, you are trapped in that wheel much longer. And then I started realizing that cost of that overhead wasn't really delivering what it promised. You got that unwritten rule of society promising, and I'd actually say that so-called security was supposed to provide actually came with a version of anxiety, stress. Definitely a lot more to manage, a lot more potential for loss, and a lot, again, like I said, a lot more to protect. And at that same level you're trying to protect it, you're also got to make sure you have enough abundance for the future. So then on the flip side, what would life look like when the overhead dropped? What became possible when the financial floor didn't require so much maintenance? And what kind of freedom does that give a person? How do you obtain that? How do you look at that? How do you view that? What is the sacrifices to do to obtain that? That's another very important question. And for many, they think it's an actual huge sacrifice when you start looking at changing your structure, changing your overhead, changing your whole position and thinking. And I would actually almost go as far as saying you almost look like it as that it's a failure. You're giving up on something because everybody else around you seems to be doing fine. And when I flipped that thought, I didn't feel poor. I actually felt lighter. And that lighter turned out to look a lot like freedom and a lot better. So let's look at one of the most expensive things. That's going to be your roof over your head, rent, mortgage, whatever it may be. And so when you look at going into a different direction, it may be extreme. In my case, many people would call this extreme. But if you can drop these prices, it can shave decades off your retirement savings plan. And that's a real reality. That's not guesswork. It's not, being deprived of anything. It's just a recalibration of what your intentions are and what your real goals are. A quick prime example is when I can find rent that's completely in a beautiful location, and it's got fully furnished with the pool, free internet, and I'm paying, shy of $300 a month for it. If you're interested in that particular video, I'll put a clip here and you can look for that. That's just a prime example of changing your overhead. Now I've got room to make choices that a high overhead life couldn't accommodate. To leave something that wasn't working, to say no to things that paid well, but the cost too much in other ways. This is a very difficult choice that we all sometimes get faced with. And it's not necessarily a financial strategy in the same way. It's just that's what happens when you stop needing so much, or you have that illusion of needing so much. And here's what I think nobody really tells you about wanting less, and actually why I think is one of the most underrated forms of freedom available to most people. And truly, less is a different kind of more. I mean, we think of freedom as the ability to get more of what we want. But is that really freedom? Or is that chasing freedom? There's a big difference right there. So there is another kind of freedom, the kind that comes generally from wanting less, but at the same time feeling like you have more. This is the key factor. Not saying I'm settling, not giving up. Wanting less because, looked at clearly at what more was actually delivering and found that math just actually really didn't work. When your needs are modest, a modest income is enough. When a modest income is enough, you have the options that people earning 3 times as much don't have because their overhead consumes it. And that's a pretty powerful thing to sit with for a moment. And I will argue it's a circle both ways. That rat race, that illusion you got to get this before you're happy. You can reverse engineer that. The person who needs little in many practical ways is more free than the person who earns much more. I'll give you a prime example. When I'm in the Philippines, so many times they feel that the locals, oh, you're so rich. And, and I explain to them because, not really. You always look at, you never look at what the person makes. You look at what the person can keep. So yes, I understand what the locals think foreigners are extremely rich. Yeah, they make way more money, dollar to dollar. However, when your rent is 4 times the amount, when your car insurance is 10 times the amount, when your cell phone provider is so much more, you have to have a higher income, right? So that's kind of a really good example right there. Yeah, in the Philippines, they make a lot less money, but that's one example. A lot of their cost of living is a lot less, right? So it's not what you earn, it's what you can keep. It's your overhead. Because freedom isn't really about income. It's about the gap between what comes in and what life requires. And when you can start focusing on that, and you can have an open mind to realizing, okay, shift what my life requires, and then how does that fit into what I actually truly want out of my life? Because if I can lower what my life requires, I'm actually going to gain a lot more because I'm going to get a lot more freedom because my life requirements cost a lot less. And it's that simple shift of asking how much do I earn, or versus how much do I need? And if you say, okay, you can kind of base it. If I were to leave now, I have this kind of pension, or I don't have a pension yet, how much money do I need? Or, if I sold some stuff or whatever the scenario may be, and in most cases, when you're here in a high rat race of the circle, it's never enough because you've always got something to cover and your overhead is way too expensive. But if you can look at lowering that and you can say, okay, if I had to stop right now, what would be my income base? Okay, well, this income base is not going to work where I'm at right now, but hey, wait a minute, can it work somewhere else? And I'm not saying you got to rush out to a different country. Another prime example is even in my country, if I'm downtown in a big city, yeah, it's going to cost a lot. But there's a lot of places that are, very remote and they're a heck of a lot cheaper. Mind you, they're very remote. But my point is, that's your overhead. As soon as you've got your overhead, maybe you prefer that lifestyle. Maybe you can say it's not really a sacrifice to you. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Because needing less is something that you can control right now. And you don't have to wait. You're not waiting for the next thing. You're not waiting for anything external to change. What you can change right now, what you can totally take advantage of and control of, is what you can take less of. Getting more depends on things outside of you, depends on income. Needing less is an entirely your own decision. And that mental mindset is something really worth thinking about. Because trust me, I was stuck on that for a very long time. It's what made me really reanalyze everything and made me kind of think outside the box. Where can I go? How can I change my structure? What kind of savings do I have? What if I invest it? What could my returns be right now? And I do overthink in the sense of, okay, let's do a low estimate. Can I survive on this? Okay, well, not here, but could I survive it on somewhere else? What's my income level versus my expenditures if I go and change these things? Because at the end of the day, the results got to equal where am I the happiest? And I think most people would say they're the happiest when they have some form of freedom. And it's a financial freedom. And again, if you can control what you can have less of, this isn't one of the easiest things to control. And the minute you can bring that into perspective, your doors open extremely much where you can go and what you can do with your life. Like again, a prime example. If I'm, can you live on $1,500 a month in North America? I mean, let's face it, the rent, the food, all this kind of stuff, it's impossible. I shouldn't say it's impossible. I'm sure there's ways around it, stuff like that. But in comparison now, where I go, when I'm in the Philippines, that is abundance. That is huge. It can pay my rent. I can go out eating in the restaurants. I can go to snorkeling when I want. I go to hot springs when I want. I go jump on the scooter, put a few dollars in for fuel and away I go. That's freedom. And that's on less. I find myself, every plan I do when I'm back home, my first reaction is I have to look at my wallet. Can my wallet decide where I can go? Can my wallet decide, can I put the fuel in the vehicle? Can I get to this restaurant? How much is that going to set back my wallet? And by having it going somewhere else, again, like I say, the Philippines for me in this personal pursuit, I'm not looking at my wallet first. That is freedom. That's financial freedom. Because now I'm able to make decisions based on what I want rather than what it requires. Just to keep the lifestyle ahead, just to keep afloat, things we are required. You got your overhead. And that's the shift. When those days start feeling that they belong to me, I'm in control. The more of this having less, actually, the more control I have. Because I'm not spending forever on this wheel trying to maintain this structure. And to just be very clear, owning less, I'm not saying, live in a shoebox and get rid of everything. It's a figure of speech in the sense of changing your overhead. When I purchased my own motorcycle in the Philippines simply because that is going to save me money. I'm not renting all the time. So it's not like I'm not owning anything. And in fact, I have the opportunity in many ways to own more. I want to make that really clear. It's the overhead. We get stuck here in North America that we have to, are owning and pursuing this dream of freedom. This is at the end of the day. What's the dream? When you ask anybody, is the dream to own multiple houses? Is the dream to own all of these things? There's a reality to having some of that, why you want it. But the result is most people, I would argue, they want these things to obtain freedom. Okay, it's not necessarily that they want the house paid off, the mortgage paid off. Who doesn't? But the point of it, why do you want your mortgage paid off? Okay, is it because you want your mortgage paid off? Is it much of a hassle to have the money taken from your bank automatically? No, it's not a hassle at all. What the hassle is putting the money into the bank account so the money can go out. So it's not a matter of, there's a really shift in perspective on how you look at things. And I think what's really difficult, because even for myself it was difficult, is that shift when you think like, okay, well, am I giving up? Is it a failure? Am I weak? What's going on here? I should be on this rat race. I should be thinking, okay, no, I need this. I got to have their bank accounts doing this. I better even think about working until past 65. Everybody else has to. That status, that signal that used to feel so necessary, gradually lost its pull for me, for sure. And it's not an easy shift when you got to think about it. You're thinking like, okay, am I really smart? Am I actually doing the right thing, selling everything, and then think, okay, I'm just going to go this direction. It's going to buy me more freedom. You ponder back and you think, I don't know. I don't see waves of people doing this. It's kind of scary. But the reality is what's more important at the end of the day was I recognized my goal, my true essence of the goal. And that was freedom, personal inner happiness. And that's the goal. That's the pure end of it. And many people talk about it. And they say, yeah, that's what it is when I get this, or that's when I acquire this, I'll get it. But I was seeing that it was sort of an illusion. The minute you got to decide what you're going to do for your day by knowing what's in your wallet, that's not freedom. And by building your lifestyle around having less, wanting less, surprisingly, something really miraculously happens. Your wallet seems to be a lot fuller. You can afford these things. And after all of that friction and scariness and self-doubt, something really surprised me that I didn't miss most of it at all. In fact, by me going back and forth, and have been doing this for several years now, I get a really clear concept picture of how this is work when I'm there for 6 months versus here for 6 months. And the things I thought I needed to feel secure, a lot of them were just simple, they were really expensive ways of managing anxiety that a simpler life, didn't produce in the first place. To try, that's a real fact. Now, I'm not saying you have to, run out and go to a different country. But if you start analyzing the difference you'd be surprised how many more options there is. By unloading and wanting less, you will actually gain more. There's more has a cost that doesn't show up on an invoice, okay? It shows up in the obligations, the overhead, the maintenance, the anxiety, the overwhelming feeling of pressure, all the things you take on. And less, real, chosen, deliberately less has a value that just doesn't show up anywhere. Not going to get an invoice on that one either. But it shows up in the options that you suddenly have, the decisions you can make, actually, those days that are more rewarding. You have way more personal freedom. And that freedom without guilt, that's a huge thing. It's just worth asking what the more is actually costing you and whether what it's buying is what you thought it really was. And does the goalpost move? Do you feel overwhelmed? Because I did for many years, and it was a choice, and it was how I would even say that I kind of got forced into this choice a little bit, but by doing so, it's opened up so many more doors. And truly, there's a hidden gift in that. And this is what I like to share, because it's not only about the simpler lifestyle, but I can also show you the direction I've taken. A lot of people are thinking about going to different countries, making a bigger move. It's getting more and more popular than it was a few years back. And I'm here to help share these experiences, also my I've done along the way. And I'd like to engage. If you have questions on it, by all means, pop them in the comments there. I can reply. And that's what this really is about. So it's about, feeling happier, healthier, and content. And there's something very wonderful when you make such a huge decision and you're going into another area, experiencing a new culture, new foods, new weathers, and everything is new, and you feel rejuvenated because you've just let go of all that weight, that North American style rat race feeling that you've got to keep up with everything just to maintain. I'd almost think this is kind of a funny thing too, because it kind of makes me think, a lot of people, when they retire, they actually get sick. I think a lot of it has to do with they don't know how to deal with it. All their life is like, okay, I'm supposed to be here now. I'm supposed to all of a sudden magically wake up the day after retirement and be happy. And then, they're not happy and they don't know what the routine should be. And if you ever thought these kind of questions yourself, and if you ever kind of stuck in this whole scenario of what to do, where to go, and how to go about it, and how to actually think about having less, which actually gives you more, then you're at the right channel here. And by all means, engage with me, and I'll be more than happy to help you out. I'll be also doing stuff, again, just more on the cost sides of it. If you're ever interested in that directly, let me know, because it's not just definitely there's cost, but it's also a healthier lifestyle for foods. That's another thing to keep in mind. I've been noticing that just what they put in the foods, and a lot of these places where things are not as expensive, their food quality is actually better as well. So it's like a double whammy of goodness. Anyway, guys, I really appreciate your engagement watching through all of this, and hopefully you subscribe and leave some comments and share. This would be great, and I'll be making some more, and see you in the next one, guys.